So here we are working on the Z column right here. The first thing to do is to identify the pivot. Remember your leading ones as we're coming down the pivot spot. Your next pivot is going to be in this location right here in row 3. The pivot spot in the Z column will always be row 3, that bottom row of the third column of the matrix, right there. The next thing we want to do is see, is there an easy way to get the pivot to be a 1? 2 things to check every time. Can you switch with a row below it? Guess what? No row below it, so that's not going to work. Can we multiply or divide this row by something that's going to get us to have a 1 here without fractions or decimals? Absolutely. If we divide this whole row by -80, we are going to have a much prettier little matrix here that's going to be much nicer to work with. 0 divided by -80 is still 0. 0 divided by -80 is still 0. -80 divided by -80 gives us 1. -240 divided by -80 gives us 3. These smaller numbers are going to make it much better for us to work with as we continue. All right, now we've got our pivot. It's even a pretty 1. Next, we need to get zeros in the Z column. So these two, the 11 and the -3, need to become 0. Let's start with getting the 0 up here in row 1. Again, our pivot for the Z column is row 3 this time, so that's the one that we're going to use. When you're getting a 0, start with the row you're replacing. We're doing row 1. Use the pivot row. Pivot row is row 3 now because we're working on the Z. Now look at our numbers here and decide what is it that we can multiply by to get, or multiply to get both of those numbers to be. And we can get them both to be 11 fairly simply. So multiply, leave row 1 alone. Multiply row 3 by 11, that will get them both to be 11. And if we subtract, that will get us the 0 that we need it to be. Do our math again. Remember, you've got to do these operations all the way across. Row 1, so 13, 0, 11, 59, minus 11 times row 3 is 0, 0, 1, 3. So we've set this up. Again, don't be afraid to use your calculator. Simple mistakes are the worst to find. You should end up finding 13, 0, 0, and 26 should be our new row 1. Replacing row 1, again, that's what came first. Put all of our new math right in there. Here's our new matrix. We've got a 0 in the spot that we need it. All right, we're almost done now. The next thing that we need to do, we need a 0 in row 2 right here. All right, we're replacing row 2, so that comes first. We use the pivot row. We're in the Z, so that's row 3. We need both of these numbers to get to be the same value. We can get them both to be 3 very easily. Leave row 2 alone, multiply row 3 by 3. This time we're going to add these together because the signs were different. That will give us -3 plus +3, which will give us the 0 that we need. Set yourself up here with the math. Row 2, 0, 13, -3, -22, plus 3 times your row 3, 0, 0, 1, 3. So we're just copying those numbers straight over from there. And then do the arithmetic. This time we're going to get 0, 13, 0, -13. We're replacing that second row. Put those new numbers in that we found. And here's our matrix. All right, so we've got zeros in the X column where we need them, zeros in the Y column where we need them, and zeros in the Z column where we need them. So we're almost done. The last thing to do is to finish getting this in RREF form. Those pivots do need to be 1 at the end of the problem. We've avoided it to the very end so we didn't have fractions to deal with, and that ended up being a really great thing. Now, to finish, we can divide this first row by 13. That will get us a 1 where we need. We can divide the second row by 13 as well. That will get us the 1 that we need there. Remember to divide every single thing all the way across. 13 divided by 13 is 1. 0 divided by 0 is, or 0 divided by 13 rather, is 0. 0 divided by 13 is 0. 26 divided by 13 is 2. Second row, you get 0, 1, 0, -1. And the third row already had a 1 where we needed it, so we'll just let that one go. And there's your final answer. Once it's in this form, it's absolutely beautiful. You can read what X, Y, and Z are right off the bat. X equals 2, Y equals -1, Z equals 3. Or you can write that as a point in point form like this. All right. we have solved a matrix by getting it all the way into our REF form. What I've shown you here is a step-by-step process that you can always follow so that you're always making progress towards getting that matrix into our REF form. There are 3 allowable things that you can do: switching rows, multiplying or dividing a row, or doing that, adding a multiple of a row to a multiple of another row. So there's a lot of choices, but if you keep these steps in mind, you can always make your way through every problem without getting confused. First, work in columns from left to right. Get the X column finished first, then get the Y column, then get the Z column. When we're deciding on your pivot is always going to depend on the column that you're working on. If you're working on the X column, your pivot's row 1. If you're working on the Y column, your pivot's row 2. If you're working on the Z column, your pivot's row 3. Get a 1 in that pivot spot if you can. 2 things to check. Can you switch with the row below? Or can you multiply or divide by a non-zero number? If you can, great, do it. Otherwise, just make sure it's not 0 and call it good. Then get zeros in each column where you need them. So once you've got a 1 in, or at least a non-zero number in the pivot, make sure every other number in that column is a 0. You always start with the row you're replacing and then add or subtract the pivot row. You can do it the other way around, but this will come in handy in later sections when we're using other methods. It doesn't make a difference now, but it will make a difference later, so it's a good habit to get into. Finally, when you have all your zeros in all your columns where you need them, just get those pivots to equal 1 in the very last step to finish getting them into REF form. If you keep these things in mind, you'll be able to step-by-step progress through these problems. I hope this has been helpful, and be sure to check out some of the other videos as they become available so that you can continue on your progress of learning more about matrices. Thank you.